Hello. There has always been an amazing spirit of innovation at the tabletop, with many amazing companies producing a great many amazing games, using miniatures in innovative ways, and exploring settings and IPs in ways that no one previously imagined. My guest today is one of the co-founders and the creative director of Steamforged Games, one of the companies that has absolutely embraced that spirit, bringing IPs from video games like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, and Resident Evil to the tabletop in fascinating new ways, as well as creating original IPs and new settings, new games, new rules like Guildball. Most recently, they took on the license for Warmachine with the intention of reinvigorating and relaunching an incredible game range. We talk about what it is like to run a company in the modern marketplace. How do you take a legacy IP and refresh it for a new audience? And what's it like creating games for a living? I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Steamforged Games creative director, Matt Hart. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you. I like to start just by exploring a little bit about how you came to be involved with games in the first place. Have you always been a gamer?
Um, for as long as I can remember, yeah. And there's an ever so slightly embarrassing story as to where I first kind of discovered gaming. But I
Right.
was I think I was about 8 years old, and my mum and dad. I kind of I was always one of those kids apparently that never really paid attention, never really kind of concentrated, and yet the teachers kind of recognized that there was a bit of a spark in there.
Hmm.
So my mum and dad, bless them, thinking that little Matt was super special, went off and kind of got me tested. And it turned out that I had a ridiculously high IQ, and I got involved into a at the time the government were doing some gifted child kind of scheme.
Right.
Now there wasn't a bald man in a wheelchair, sadly, but I went off and did a couple of kind of like courses, I guess, or sort of stay
Hmm.
away things, where they, in Essex, which is where I live, they pulled all these gifted kids together and shoved them in a room and just gave us loads of weird tests and stuff. It was
Right.
bizarre. Like it was in this
Yeah.
country house. I mean, it just the mind boggles when you think about it now, but this was like 40 odd years ago. Um, and I met a guy called Jason White, who was sort of same sort of age, actually lived in the village, but he went to a different school to me, and he showed me this game called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and
Right.
it just, yeah, it was like it just lit the blue touch paper, and my brain was alive with this, and I've been largely obsessed with that, and a fantasy basically since. So yeah, I exclusively read fantasy novels. I occasionally dabble in sci-fi, but fantasy is my first and only love. And yeah, I kind of followed a career path, worked for Games Workshop at one point in time, then decided I needed a proper job, then realized I could have a proper job in the video game industry.
Hmm.
Um, and so I could kind of like dabble, both needs of my life, and yeah. So I think the short answer is yes. I've always been a gamer.
Sure, yeah. Fascinating that. That's an amazing story. I'm hoping Jason didn't grow up to be your sort of evil counterpart in the
Oh,
gaming industry.
do you know what? Like I lost touch with him like decades ago. So it's one of those things where I mean, I don't use social media, so maybe one day I would log on to a dusty old Facebook, and see if I can track him down. But yeah, it'd be quite fun to kind of see what he made of his life as well. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
fascinating.
Hopefully, maybe he is somewhere out there plotting his long revenge on me 4 decades later.
You mentioned that you worked in Games Workshop. Was that in the retail space that you were working then?
Yeah, I worked at the Oxford Street when it was in the Plaza shopping
Right.
centre.
Okay.
It's where I learned to paint, and also where I discovered Blood Bowl and Warhammer Fantasy, and really got into that. But I also uh, there was a huge amount of talented painters in the store. So I got to learn from some really good, people. Obviously, it was the painting style back then, which is
Mm,
30 years ago. So it was all like heavy black lining, and it was more, it wasn't even volumetric highlighting. It was literally sort of area highlighting, and
right.
so every area was highlighted to the same value, and it didn't matter what it was. So, um, but because Games Workshop at the time, and I don't know if they still do, I think they do, don't pay their retail staff
Mm,
terribly well. And because this was a central London retail store, I needed to do commission painting to make ends meet. So I got really good at painting pretty decently to in a very quick fashion. So I ended up making more money from commission painting than I did. The store ended up becoming my storefront for potential
right.
customers. Oh, that's a nice Space Marine army. How would you like that painted next week? It'll only cost you 500 quid. So yeah,
Yeah.
we had a bit of a production line going on in the store. It was all terribly against the rules and everything, but the
Yeah.
store did what the store was supposed to do, and the manager was cool. So yeah, I got to sit there and paint and just chat with other painters for about 2 years, and yeah, it formed a bedrock.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's almost the dream, isn't it? Especially at that age. It's kind of perfect. That
Oh, it
sort
was
of.
great. I was 18, 19, and I was a little bit in love with one of the girls there who was, one of the better painters, and she took me under her wing and was showing me how to do it. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I was in, seventh heaven.
And then you found yourself moving into video games. So, like, what was that transition? How did that happen?
So I did a bunch of stuff, and then I just trying to remember the order. I then met my current wife and thought, do you know what? I've got to probably do something a bit more serious with my life. So I actually went back to university, got myself a degree, then got onto a graduate course where I worked for the air traffic service, the NATS, as part of their graduate scheme, and found that I had a really strong affinity and love for project management.
Right.
So I ended up training as a professional project manager, and I've managed projects that, from kind of radar installations through like touchscreen installations down at the new En route centre down in Southampton Way or Swanwick. So I kind of really quite liked project management, but
Right.
I had a hankering for something a little bit more kind of fun. And I saw that Lego were advertising for a project manager. And one of the things at that time, it was a very hard industry to get into video games because you had to have experience.
Hmm.
But how did you get it in the first place? It was quite
Sure, yeah.
tricky. And the fact that Lego specifically were looking outside of the industry for project managers to bring in a more professional project management approach seemed like a good match. So I went along, had an interview there, got offered the job. I was there for a couple of years. It was both brilliant and rubbish at the same time.
Right.
The biggest reason why it was rubbish was it was in Slough, and I live out in the heart of Essex. So
Right.
I had a 2 hour commute every day,
Yikes.
and that was grim. But the job that I was doing, I was learning a lot, making loads of good contacts, realized that I really enjoyed like the whole process of making video games, and the kind of
Mm.
people that you get to spend your time with was really cool. So I kind of did an apprenticeship, as it were, at Lego. Um, I was on the very first production team for the very first Lego Star Wars. Is a small claim to fame.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
great.
which is kind of cool. Still remember the internal pitch meeting where we were having lightsaber fights around the boardroom, which is kind of fun. But then I got a job in the centre of London, so it was half my commute, and yeah, just started kind of working my way up from there, really.
Great. Yeah, that's terrific. And then at some point, you jumped again and transitioned into tabletop gaming, right? So
Yeah,
that I mean, obviously, it feels like a natural evolution in one sense, but for tabletop gaming fans, but it also must, I imagine, have been quite a different world to enter. What was that sort of decision to jump in?
So I had I think I'd had enough of the video game industry. It was a bit like now. It was going through a little bit of a weird time.
Mm.
So I ended up getting a job with the Moo, the business card
Right.
company, as a project manager. But as part, it's still like a highly creative company, just with a different product. And I got to learn an awful lot about physical print and digital print and stuff like that. So it was actually like really, really interesting. But I never really kind of found that it caught my soul.
Sure.
Um, so I then kind of jumped back into video games, but I ended up working for a company that did free to play games. And I found, talking of my soul, I was worried about the damage that was being done to my chances of a decent rebirth in the next life, because free to play games are not the most moral
Mm.
of
Mm.
of things that you can make, and they are carefully designed to squeeze money out of people. And so I lasted there about a year before I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Mm.
And it was around that sort of time, or during that year that I was at that particular company, that Rich Loxham, who's now my business partner, he and I kind of first started talking about an idea for a game called Guildball. And we ended up working on that. And it was one, and I've said this like a number of times. Guildball was wonderfully successful, but not quite successful enough to immediately give up your day job. So I ended up kind of keeping working for this company, and was looking to kind of make that transition. Now, one of the things that really appealed to me, because during that entire process, I was also chatting to someone I used to work with at Ninja Theory, and he and I were looking at setting up a video game studio. And I distinctly remember standing on a platform in the tube station at Liverpool Street, and on the opposite platform there was, I don't know if you've ever been in the underground, but there was just like 50 odd like little advertisement posters, like A4 sheets. And obviously Apple had done a takeover, because every single one was an Apple one. And in every single one, there was a different game, but it was still an Apple logo. And it said, in the Apple store, there's 300,000 games.
Mm.
And I remember phoning Mike up, the guy, I was like, how the bloody hell are we gonna, like, we could come up with the best game in the world, but you've got a 1 in 3,000 chance, 300,000 chance of someone finding it.
Yeah.
How do we guarantee success? And what I knew from the free to play market is the way that you do that is by having millions of dollars to pump into, it's called user acquisition. So it's your UA cost. So for a game like you might play, like just trying to think off the top of my head, any of the like the big Zynga games, right? They
Right.
will spend around about 15 to 20 to 30 million dollars a month on user acquisition,
Wow.
because they know that they can then monetize them for far, far more than that.
And that user acquisition stuff would be advertising and sort of pushing
Adver
the apps, or
Advertising, cross promotion with other apps, that
right,
kind of stuff. When you're playing a game and it pops up with an advert,
right,
and you have to watch it, and then you try and click through it to carry on playing your game.
sure,
That that's where a lot of the money kind of goes on that. And you'll be surprised how many. I mean, you must have done it yourself, where you're playing a game, you watch an advert, and you go, "Oh, I can't wait for this advert to go." You go, "Oh, actually, that looks quite cool. I might just quickly install that and try that." That's it. You've now been acquired, and it
yeah,
costs the company probably about $10 to acquire you, but
right,
they know that lifetime spend of your average user is going to be way in excess of $10. So this is how it's not even gambling. It's like it's just guaranteed money. Anyway,
right,
um, so I said to Mike, I said, I just don't know how we're going to lay our hands on this money, you know. Um, and we kind of ummed and ahed and went back and forward, and Guildball was kind of like picking up, and I just realized that actually working on a tabletop game, the project life cycle for a tabletop game development is far shorter than a video game. At that time, and still even now, like if you're working on a AAA game, um, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 years. Probably 4 years is a typical for a AAA release now.
right,
Well, back when I was at Ninja Theory, we would look at sort of 2 to 2.5 years, and even that felt, oh God, why am I only
yeah,
doing one game every couple of years? So in the board game space, you're like, actually, I've got so many ideas, so many things I want to explore, so many things I think are really cool. I can kind of, and we can get these to market a lot faster. And obviously, crowdfunding was like surging in popularity and awareness at the time. So it just felt, like I naturally sort of like moved towards the tabletop space as a way of expressing my creative side, but also in a way that I know would give me that much more regular dopamine hit of having a cool idea, seeing the project realized, getting out into the market and seeing how people like it. It was really addictive. So that's largely why I find the tabletop space far more exciting than the video game space. If I wanted to be super famous and have loads of people kind of wanting to talk to me, video game is definitely the way to go because they are rock stars. They do, some of the well known, we all know, the big names and would recognize them, walking down the street. Um, and but it's hard. It's a hard industry, and
Mm.
there's a lot of people in there. And as you can see right now, it's not the greatest industry to be in. There's a market realignment, let's call it, where I think video game companies just went a little bit nuts during COVID because everyone was stuck at home. Everyone was downloading, playing loads of video games, and they're like, "Wow, we're making $1 billion a day. This is amazing." And they ended up hiring loads of people and paying people ridiculous salaries. And then after COVID, and we all had to go back to work and realized, oh crikey, we've got to actually pay back these debts that we've accrued. Better tighten our belts a little bit. Turns out that the revenue streams weren't as strong as they were, and video game companies now, and it's almost across the board. I mean, even Riot let some people go, last
Yeah.
week, didn't they? And you like, it's just a realignment across the board where they've just realised that their overheads are just colossal and they've got to trim.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating to sort of hear you how you were exploring the ideas of, right, I want to create stuff and I want to produce this sort of these experiences, I suppose. But then there were like real tangible business kind of metrics almost that you were considering, the
Mm.
user acquisition rates and the production times, that kind of stuff. Did you have access to that kind of information about the tabletop industry? Did that weigh into the sort of consideration as well? So is there, I mean, even then, do you guys in the industry think in those kinds of terms? Is there a user acquisition rate for tabletop games?
Um, I can't speak for other companies, um, but I know that everything, not everything. I try and think about stuff that I interact with and try and maybe this is some weird reveal of my inner psychology, but I always like to examine something that someone tells me or a lesson that I've learned and then work out how can I turn it to my advantage. That it can, does this actually work for me? So when I'm in the video game industry and the free to play and they one of the important metrics is user acquisition and lifetime spend and things like that, it makes me think, why is that important? What are the decisions we're making with that? And I don't sit there consciously kind of like pondering on it, but it just bubbles away. And then, you realize after 6, 9 months, you're using the same language and you're attaching the same value to these words when
Mhm.
you're communicating with someone, and it just becomes part of you. So because tabletop is incredibly synonymous with video game industry in many, many regards, it's almost like the video game industry, but like 5 to 10 years behind in terms of its maturation and where it's at. It felt a little bit like when I was chatting with Blocks about strategy and where we could go with Steamforged. It just felt like if you looked at the video game industry, you could have a glimpse in the future as to where you could be. And because they've already done that and you know what worked and what didn't work, you can then take that and apply it. So yeah, we have a degree of science to a lot of the stuff that we do. We're firm believers in, extensive cost benefits analysis before we'll go into we'll embark on a project. There are projects that we'll green light because we want to. And so there is an emotive side as well that kind of contributes to the decisions. But, we took on investment about 6 years ago. That has transformed our decision-making process. There's a lot more strength and infrastructure in the business now in terms of having to make more detailed analysis of decisions before we make them because you make the wrong decision, you got 40,000 customers, it gets expensive real quick. Even if you're wrong by just $10, that's a heck of a lot of money that suddenly you got fined from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's data out there, but I think and this is weirdly one of the things I wrote my dissertation on, but it's the difference between data and information is data is easy to get hold of. It's translating and interpreting data to be a usable form, i.e. information. So it's looking at trends, it's looking at what people are talking about, it's looking at sales figures, it's looking, and there's a whole bunch of different data that you can scrape from all different places. But then it's looking at it all and trying to form like just a common view of, well, if that is doing that, that must mean that. Therefore, does this mean that this is truth? So I like doing that stuff. My brain likes unpicking puzzles and tickling away at things. So I read a lot, and keep I've often described us as of students of our industry, and it means that Rich and I and actually it filters through. Everyone at Steamforge is keenly interested and active in the industry and as gamers and as professionals. So there's an awful lot of views and awareness and stuff available just within our internal team. So it all kind of goes into a melting pot. So yeah, no, we don't have a specific kind of conduit for crunchy data that we then turn into information, but we just absorb it from wherever we can.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's fascinating. I think, like you say, there's so much data out there, and I bet there's a lot of fun you can have with the metrics and the analysis there. But I mean, thinking about, in one sense, it's almost like games mechanics writ large. Decision making that you would do on a tabletop itself, but bigger.
Yeah.
But you talked about Guildball and the creation of that. I mean, what inspired that? You also mentioned Blood Bowl before. I'm assuming there was a certain amount of that in there. But what brought you to let's create a fantasy sports game?
So Rich and I were playing a lot of Warmachine. It's essentially how we met each other was I think it was at the Welsh Masters in Cardiff, and we just kind of got friendly as you do. You meet other guys and girls that play the same game that you do, and we ended up chatting, and we ended up. There was a group of us that would, between tournaments, as it were, online, we would just hang out, play League of Legends, just chat crap with each other. And we ended up having a Blood Bowl league online. And because I'm a painter, I picked up some Blood Bowl models. I started painting. I mean, we were playing virtually, but I just wanted to paint a Blood Bowl team. Yeah. And then we were at another event, and I was kind of just sitting there. And Richard and I had already been talking about a few ideas, and we were exploring how interested we were in sort of dipping our toes in the water. And I kind of just was sitting there looking at a Warmachine table, thinking about my orcs at home, and thought, how cool would that be? And it reminded me of a comic strip from 2000 AD called Mean Streets, which was about a fantasy football league in it was like post-apocalyptic 1980s like UK, so that you had like these kind of weird rundown suburban decayed areas in like inner city areas in like Plymouth and London and Liverpool, and they all had their own team, and their teams all had their own identity and therefore their own play styles. So I kind of just mixed that all together, and the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle was I just watched Gangs of New York and seen that first fight scene, and kind of fell in love with the normal clothing that had been transformed into essentially football kits. They looked like sports kits. They were in the same team. They were all kind of stripes painted on them and everything. So that all kind of coalesced into the idea that it ultimately became Guildball, where each of the teams represented a different professional trade, and that was their visual identity, but also their play style as well. So yeah, it was a like a lot of things. It was a bit of column A, B, C, and D, and then it was all sort of smashed together, and an idea came out of it.
And then that went onto the Kickstarter and did really well, right? That was
It did
a
really well.
successful.
Yeah, yeah, it did far better than our expectations. I don't know if we had realistic expectations or not. We then went on to take it to Salute, and I mean, we caused Salute major problems because we were tiny. We had like a little 10 by 10 booth,
Yeah.
and they just plugged us in, in one of the aisles somewhere. But we had so many people who wanted to come and pick up their stuff and buy Guildball because they'd heard about it and missed out on the Kickstarter that we actually caused like traffic carnage. And it just locked up this part of the hall. And it was, I mean, we had no concept of this. We were in the booth just hand over fist, people just throwing money at us and taking minis away. It was an amazing day, and I think that kind of really sort of upped the profile of Guildball. And at that point, I then started having some phone calls with distributors and things like that, and the business side then kind of kicked in. We got it into distribution. Next thing you know, one distributor's got it, they all want it.
Mm.
And then it starts to kind of, it takes off like a rocket. If you're not careful, it goes like this, and then just suddenly it just goes vertical, and you have to cling on and ride the ride for as long as you can.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned though that it was successful, but not successful enough to sort of quit the day job. But then,
Yeah.
when did that point kind of come, and how did you face into that decision? Because I imagine that must be quite daunting to say, right, I'm going to do something brand new. I'm going to start from scratch this new company.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple of things that kind of sort of factored in. So Rich at the time was a teacher, so he had a very limited window of when it's appropriate for him to hand his notice in. So I don't know if in teaching profession, it's not the done thing to kind of leave other than in the summer. You have
Right,
to, yeah, you tend to need to, you can't just leave in September and go, oh yeah, I'm going to go and, work somewhere else now and leave the kids behind. That's just
right.
not seen as a good thing to do. So he kind of was waiting until the summer. And at the time I was earning considerably more than Rich was because I was fairly, senior kind of video game producer, and Rich was a teacher, design teacher in Manchester. So there was a differential there. So transitioning Rich into full time was the first and easiest thing for us to kind of, see the business being able to sustain. I needed to kind of wait just a little bit longer, but I I have strategy. I knew what we wanted to do and how we worked towards it. So I saved and protected our income. I put in place a couple of key steps that I needed to make sure that my family and my income was kind of good for a year or so before we take that risk. I then jumped across, and then we worked like Billy O what I thought was going to be for a year, but 10 years later we're still working 10 to the dozen, and and working as hard as we can. But at the moment, yeah, so far so good. It's all panning out as it, couldn't have asked for more, to be honest with you. The way where Steamforged is at now compared to where it was 10 years ago.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, a real success story. And
Mm.
I guess one part of that engine and that growth has come from looping back into your relationship with the video games world, right? And you've looked at the IPs and whether we can bring things across. I mean, is that how that emerged? Was it literally just I'm familiar with this, so let's jump in there, or did it come about in a different way?
Well, it felt like, I mean, and look, Steamforged wasn't the first company to do licensed games
Sure.
for tabletop, but um, when I looked at those games in the market, the same frustrations I had with original IP that ultimately led to Rich and I starting Steamforged, which was feeling a little bit frustrated that the design wasn't deep enough. It felt like it was phoned in a little bit. For a lot of this stuff, it's a white box with a new skin put on it, and it's, oh come on, that's like such a great IP, and that's what you do with it. Like, come on. So I kind of felt that there was some potential looking at video games, and obviously with my experience and my contacts, it felt like an obvious thing to explore. How it came about, though, was a little bit more random. I was at the British licensing show in London, and I met someone on the Bandai Namco booth who I swear to God I knew, and um, I had this kind of ability to just I firmly believe that people who aren't my friends are only our future friends now, and I will treat you as such. I will chat to you as if I've known you forever, and and hopefully we will then know each other forever. But so I was chatting to this guy, and I think he thought that he must know me, but he clearly couldn't remember me, and I thought I knew him, and was talking as if I knew him. And in the end, he kind of said, I'm looking after Dark Souls at the moment. Do you think that would translate well into the board game space? And I said, yeah, I think it would. I'm working on a Dungeon Explorer engine right now, and I think it would work brilliantly. So basically, he said, look, if you can get it all done before year end, I can get the deal rubber stamped on my side. Bearing in mind this was, I think, November time. So we went from naught to Kickstarter done in about 4 months.
Wow.
So yeah, we crunched like we and coming from the video game industry, I've worked on projects where I've done 7 days a week for 15 hours, 16 hours a day. So a bit of crunch doesn't please me, but it doesn't scare me. So when you have to, you put a bit of a burn on, and that's just the way the world works. So we crunched our asses off to kind of get that over the line. Got the Kickstarter done, made some horrendous mistakes with the Kickstarter, as is fairly well documented. And Yeah, that's really what kind of catapulted. So Guildball was already kind of giving us a good profile.
Mm.
The Dark Souls numbers, at the time, it was the largest Kickstarter in our kind of segment, and it just sort of like raised our profile like 10 notches higher, and yeah, it kind of really set our feet onto the path that we're on at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it being a huge success, very, very popular, a lot of talk about it. I mean,
Yeah.
the use of Kickstarter intrigues me as well, because obviously that's evolved and changed over the last 10 or 20 years
Mm.
as a sort of avenue for different companies to sort of create different games there. I mean, from your perspective, have you seen the use of Kickstarter change, or is it quite consistent in how it's being approached?
Oh no, it changes. I I'm trying to think of a frequency. I think it's just incredibly fluid. I think every project is different, and I think the audience is constantly shifting and evolving. There's you could zoom back out and paint with fairly broad strokes, and certainly you know back when we started, the intention of Kickstarter was to see if you could raise some capital in order to take something to market. And obviously now the expectation is you already have that product pretty much done, and this is essentially a pre-order system with perks. But I think that's quite a cynical way of looking at it, and I think one of the ways that we think about it at Steamforged, and how we try and behave with Kickstarter is it's also an exciting time to have 8,000 people suddenly smushed together on one thing for a very short burst of time, like for 2 weeks. So it's incredibly energizing, it's incredibly frenetic, and it's incredibly exciting. And I think that excitement feeds out to everyone. So I don't think it's just cool for, us on the development and publishing side. I think it's cool for the community. It's like, this brand new community that pops up. So we lean more into that. Obviously Steamforged is a point where, the financial side of things is an advantage, but it's not a necessity for us having an awareness of the games we're making, and people being able to make an informed choice as to whether they think this is a game for them or not. That's more important, because if I sell you a game that ultimately you don't like because I've kind of not told you enough about it, you think twice before buying another one of our games. Whereas if you can see everything about a game, listen to 8,000 other people talking about it. Make your own decision, buy it. You've got a much higher chance of liking it. If you like it, you're a much higher chance. Goes back to that user acquisition. If I acquire you and then treat you properly over the course of your lifetime, you'll end up spending more money with us, which sounds very mercenary, but the return flow is cool games that kind of come your way for your hard-earned dollars. And this is one of it's the win-win relationship. Is like, if we can build games that people want and we make sure that we keep our standards in terms of the production value and the effort that we put into them, and we make sure that what we're presenting to people is actually value for money,
Yeah.
then I never lose a wink of sleep selling these products to people, because I know that they are good products, and because I know how hard it is to earn the money. You want to spend $100 on a game. Well, people have got to work nearly a whole day, some people, to earn $100. Well, that's quite a lot of money,
Mhm.
So we need to make sure that you're getting $100 worth of value out of it, and more, really. And I think that's the thing that probably I'm most proud of, is knowing that the products that we've made as a team have brought countless thousands of hours of of entertainment. Not always happy, but of entertainment. Hopefully mostly happy, hopefully mostly positive, to thousands and thousands of people around the world. That's pretty cool.
Mm.
So yeah, no, I'm pretty stoked about where things are at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Is there any sort of do you see any kind of different interaction with fans and with the audience and with the people who are buying games who are super excited and sort of hyped within that initial Kickstarter period, but then there might be a period of where it cools down a bit because of
Hmm.
delivery, and then when things actually come out and they hit shelves and they're in stores, does that kind of lull change the relationship with the audience, or is everyone just familiar with that? That's how these things work now.
Um, it can do if you're not careful, and I think it can come across as quite um transactional or quite mercenary if you pretend that you want this amazing community. I've now squeezed all the money out of you. Now I'm going to ignore you for 12 months, and then I want you to be excited when the game comes out, because now I want retail sales,
Mm.
and then I want to not have anything to do with you until we do like an expansion. That's I don't you say it out loud and you see other companies doing that, but when you say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. Then why would you ever do that? We make communities because we want to make people to hang out with, to talk about with games, because deep down all of us are gamers as well, and we like, if we weren't doing this professionally, we'll be sitting on our computers typing in, Discord or wherever we choose to hang out about games with people. So that lull period, yeah, I think the crowdfunding audience is aware. But one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is we keep constant kind of flow of communication with the community. We have a really healthy and vibrant Discord channel that, regardless of what Steamforged game that you're playing, you can kind of generally find other people to sort of like chat to. We all hang out on Discord as well. We keep, regular releases, blogs kind of going out to make sure people understand what's going on with the projects. These are all lessons that we learned the hard way through, the stuff that happened with Dark Souls and other projects that, we've just found the thing that works for us. And I don't think it's the only way of doing it, but I think because it works for us, it's more authentic and more instinctive for us to behave this way, and therefore it comes across as more genuine. So I really like the relationship we have with the various communities that we kind of interact with now. Absolutely, there's going to be frustrations, and we we tend to be terribly British about how we do things. I firmly believe in taking responsibility. Sometimes things happen outside of your control, but if you're the face for it, you got to take the hit. That's all there is to it. So it may well be, and we've had this before, where our IP partners have deprioritized signing off on a thing, and we need that thing in order. Otherwise, we're going to hit a couple of month delay, and they don't do it. What are you going to do? You're not going to go, oh, so and so, like, screwed us over, and that's why the project's late. You can't do that, because you never work with them again, and everyone go, yeah, you're just saying that. it's weak sauce to kind of like try and pin the blame on other people. It's down to us. So us holding our hands up, taking the hits, it is what it is, you know. And projects do go left and right. Unfortunately, generally they tend to go more to the right than they go to the left. But we've delivered some projects early. Bardsung was an absolute triumph that I don't think we made enough of a song and dance about it, but maybe that is back to us being British again. But that was in the middle of COVID, and we delivered that 3 months early.
Right.
For a Kickstarter, it's unheard of to actually deliver early. So, you know, we should take the smooth with the rough, because there's God knows there's enough rough. You know, it'd be nice to enjoy the smooth every now and then. But yeah, I think the audience is aware that there is that like little lull period, and I think as long as you are respectful and interacting with them for the right reasons, I think you can avoid that kind of. People generally have the strongest reactions when they have the least amount of information.
Sure.
So if you keep people informed of what's going on, then they can choose how to have a reaction to it. Generally, if you are really furious about something, it's because you've been kept in the dark, or you feel like you've been kept in the dark. So for us, transparency about what's going on, good or bad, trying to sort of smooth, you know, obviously trying to smooth the message and everything, but being honest with people, we've found is absolutely the right policy.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we can tell the smoothest, you know, story possible. It won't change the fact it's still late, you know,
Sure,
it's still different, or it's still not what you thought it was going to be. So we've got to rip that plaster off at some point in time. I'm more pragmatic. I'd rather say, yeah, look, this isn't great. This is where it's at, but this is what we're going to do. And that, you know, that's where the world is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, probably the best way to approach it, I think, for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. And you have to be mindful. This is one of the interesting things that I was aware of when I was making video games, but really punched home working in tabletop is your geo difference, like where people are based, it's probably the most important thing. The American audience is very different from the UK audience, is very different from the German audience, very different from the French audience, the Spanish, like
in terms
every
of
single
expectations
audience
and stuff.
yeah, in terms of expectations, what they value more highly, what they are willing, you know, to let go on. There's a wide differing response depend on where people are based, really. It's you know, one day if I ever get the time, I'd love to write a white paper about it, but I think there's something really fascinating in there that sort of, you know, shows the cultural differences around the world, and yet we're all playing the same game. And it's almost as if sometimes we're all playing the same game, and yet we've all got different views on what that game actually is.
Sure, yeah. Everyone's got different win conditions, I suppose. Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've kind of played D&D or any role playing
Sure,
games. I can see
yeah.
a few things in your background. For me, that's one of the fascinating things about an RPG is you're sitting around the table with a bunch of friends, and you've all got the same inputs and the same information, but I know damn straight that my worldview of what my internal kind of cinema of what's happening is going to be similar to, but different to my friend, to my other friend, to my other friend, and yet we're sharing this kind of different faceted view of the same thing. This thing doesn't actually ever exist. It's like it's endlessly fascinating when you think about the dynamics of what's happening there.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah. And when you remember, you look back at a great game, a great gaming session, no one had the same gaming session. You did,
Right.
but you also didn't. It is fascinating. I totally agree
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's personalities as well. Like, I still remember we were playing a game, and I think we were off doing. I was running it, I think, and one of my mates, Darren, wanted to go off and do something which was a bit more proactive. One of my other mates, John, his character just wanted to go to the library and help, like, the local cleric organize their books in a better order. And I'm like, and I just went, is that actually what you want to spend this session? He goes, yeah, definitely. Okay, I don't even know where to go with that for sure. So we were off going doing adventure things. Got to the end of the session, and John had been talking about how he was like organizing this, that, and the other, and like, you know, and we'd had a few little role playing sort of, you know, scenes with various clerics running around with like big piles of books and John up ladders and stuff, or his character up ladders. He loved it. He thought it was one of the best sessions ever. And I'm like, you didn't really do anything, but sure, if it floats your
Yeah,
boat, I'm all for it.
brilliant. That's great. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. But just going back to Steamforged and how you've evolved and changed. I mean, more recently, you had a major acquisition, and it actually loops back into those games. Where you met Rich and started playing
Mm,
games together, right? Because you have acquired Warmachine now, and you're
yes.
sort of reworking that. Can you tell me a little bit about that process? Like, how did that come about? I mean, that feels like a dream come true sort of situation in one sense.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it certainly feels like quite a neat circle now.
Mm.
The where it started and now where we currently are at feels really interesting. How it came about is like a lot of things. Uh, you just punt out a question and sometimes you get an answer. So you go fishing and you see what happens. We knew that over the years there'd been an awful lot of talk and rumors of various deals that have been put in place to acquire Warmachine previously, or the Iron Kingdoms, and for whatever reason, and that these had never sort of actually materialized. But there was enough kind of conversation about them that you think, well, maybe there is an interest, from Matt and Sherry's side to look to leverage their equity, as it were. Um, and so we did. Rich reached out and pinged Matt, and this was like years ago, and just sort of said, hey, look, if you ever are looking at this, then we want to register our interest. And Matt replied back and sort of said, thanks for your interest, but not right now. It's all cool, blah blah blah. And we kind of sort of loosely sort of stayed in touch, and then we would sort of bump into him at Gen Con most years and just catch up with him. And it was Gen Con last year or the year before, where we were just having a chat with him, and he sort of said, I might be coming around to the idea. Are you still interested? And we're like, well, yeah, let's get some paperwork signed, get an NDA signed, and let's start swapping some numbers and seeing what the world actually looks like, and whether there's a landing strip for a deal to be brought down to the ground. And it took about a year and a half of kind of back and two and talking about things and making sure we understood what the relationship was going to look like, and what the future could look like. And I think one of the things that was happening during that process was Matt was sounding us out for how authentic were we in terms of our love for Warmachine, and how would we act as custodians of what is arguably a very important IP in the tabletop space. It's been around for 25 years. There's not many IPs that can claim that. And I think we got to know them, they got to know us. The deal started to materialize as something that we could kind of pull together and make sense. So yeah, we went fishing, we got a little bite, and then we kind of worked hard to kind of get the fish onto the bank. And I was chatting with Matt last week, just having a sort of one-to-one catch up because I've been away for a week, and just saying how enjoyable it was, how seamless it had felt that we've sort of slotted into working with the PP dev team, how they've fully embraced me as the chief creative officer, and I feel like I'm kept in the loop, and have a key role in the decisions being taken and the overall direction. I feel really happy about the way things are set up right now, and I actually said to Matt, I said, if I ever find myself in the same position that you're in, I would love to be, a fraction of what you are. Like working with him is brilliant, and he's made it brilliant. So yeah, I'm thrilled. It was one of those big risks. Whenever you do an integration like that, there's an awful lot of potential things that can go wrong with it, but touch wood, it's all kind of slotted into place nicely at the moment. There's the usual kind of supply chain stuff, and that's one of the areas that we've been really focusing on strengthening for the last kind of like 6 months now. Is making sure we're getting that output, but the output from the same team of people is now twice what it was when we took over, and we're about to give them another injection of nitrous oxide with some new tech, just updating some printers and improving their pipeline and everything like that. So yeah, it's all heading in the right direction at the moment.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, that must be quite exciting to have an IP that you used to play and enjoy and now be the stewards of and get to look at what that future might be, right? And you're sort of planning, well, where do we take it? Because I also imagine there's a certain amount of tension perhaps within that. How much is it continuity? How much do we want to keep things moving forward as they have been versus how much do we want to reinvigorate and refresh and change things,
Mm,
but stay true? I mean, that
mm.
those conversations must have been really interesting, and I imagine it still are.
Yeah, they're live. Those are live discussions rather than conversations that have ended.
Sure.
I think there's a couple. There's so many things that we could talk about this for the next couple of hours, but I think what's important to understand is what makes Iron Kingdoms as compelling as it is, and what do fans of that IP remember? What do they want to play? Nostalgia is such a powerful lever for anything in, not just in gaming, but for anything. What movies you want to watch, or the cars that you kind of like fall in love with, and all that kind of stuff. Nostalgia is so important. And I think, but you have to balance that kind of nostalgic view with the realization that the audience that you're communicating with and selling to aren't necessarily the same people that they were 10, 15 years ago. And I think Wizards of the Coast published some analysis that this was a few years back, where they believed that their audience recycled every 5 years.
Right.
Um, and this is sort of a fairly big paper kind of condensed down, but
Sure.
their thesis was that an audience will effectively refresh every 5 years. Now, obviously, there will still be some people who've been playing Magic for the last 20 years, of course, but if you look below that sort of 20%, 80% of the audience is recycled. Though the people playing Magic now weren't playing it 5 years ago.
Sure.
So that kind of sort of stuck in my mind, and it definitely feeds in with when we're looking at the different audiences that we want to communicate with about Warmachine. Obviously, there are lapsed players, there are people who played it back in the day, people who might want to come back and try it again. The current version of the rule set is arguably the best version of the rule set that there's been. It's been refined, it's balanced, it's playing really tightly at the moment, which makes my life a lot easier because I'm building on a really stable platform. And you listen to the audience, and this is again going back to what we were chatting earlier about how important the community is.
Mm.
It's a you can crowdsource ideas, you can listen to what people are talking about, you can get a sense of what they think is important and isn't important. It's your job is to then translate that into actionable, information.
Mm.
And looking at what people are talking about Warmachine, some of the older factions that they were going, oh, I wish this was there and that was there and that was going to do that. But then you have to balance that with, the dev team and them wanting to explore different parts of the world or different aspects of the world. And it's just finding that sweet spot where you have, you still maintain that nice broad appeal, you still retain that product identity, like, it has to feel like Iron Kingdoms, but you still want to have some newer, fresher feeling things. And then that way, the older players coming back will find something new and interesting. The newer players who have no preconception will find something new and interesting because it's all new to them, and it has that kind of core DNA that Iron Kingdoms had that keeps you kind of hooked into the world and what's going on. At the end of the day, it's massive steam jacks and huge war beasts smashing into each other like King Kong and Godzilla, but in a kind of full metal, grimy fantasy world. Brilliant, So as long as we keep that at its core,
Yeah.
we never lose sight of what the Iron Kingdoms is.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious as well about you mentioned before the video game development cycle is quite long.
Mm.
In tabletop, it's a lot shorter, but I imagine there must be something really interesting in a persistent game, a persistent tabletop game
Mm.
where you have a product line, essentially. Your pipeline is presumably quite long. I mean,
Yeah.
so you, and you don't have to get into this if you can't talk about it, right? But like, how far ahead do you start planning for this kind of stuff? Are you thinking about, right, where do we go over the next X number of years and that sort
Yeah.
of thing?
Yeah. So let me just kind of make sure I understand what I want to say and what I can say. So
Sure.
I've got a roadmap for the key the key points for the next 5 years for
Right.
Warmachine. So I know pretty much what the current kind of wave is, and then what the next wave is,
Mm,
and we've got that mapped out. And one of the reasons why it's important to kind of map that out is because I like to hang the story
mm,
off of, the releases need to support the story and the story needs to support the releases. So knowing the flow of the story arc that we want to be telling in the next kind of major part of the narrative helps us kind of shape when those things are going to come out. And I think it also helps me understand, you know, if we've and this comes back down to kind of more game design and game experiences. If you've got a heavy recursion faction, you don't want another heavy recursion faction because they both lose their individuality and their identity.
mm.
So, all right, we've got this one's recursion, so that's a cool idea, but we can't do that. We need to do something else. So having that holistic view for 5 years means that I can look at it and say, right, of these 20 odd army lists, with the current ones and the future ones, I can now kind of see, does everyone have, it's almost like a normalization, or no, not a normalization, more a polarization. Are they all distinct and different from each
Right.
other? Do they, there's obviously going to be overlaps. There's obviously going to be, bits where they butt up against each other. But generally, does that army feel distinct from every other army? So that's an important part of it. And it also, it helps us kind of forecast and make sure that we're kind of scaling up. And this is one of the challenges for Warmachine is right now, like the resin models that we release are great, super detailed. The material we're working with, we're transitioning over to our own proprietary blend now of resin, which is really, really good in terms of how strong it is, how much detail it has, and how well it kind of behaves. And also, from a production point of view, how reliably it prints and things like that. But there's a finite limit to the number of minis that we can kind of put out. Now, obviously, we can employ more people in the production team. We can have more machines with it, but at some point in time, that scaling starts to kind of become quite unwieldy and starts to fall over. So looking at, alternative materials, obviously HIPS, which is the plastic more, most commonly associated with Games Workshop and Malifaux and other people like that. That is much more suited to a higher volume,
Mm.
but doesn't work at the lower volumes. So right now, where Warmachine is at is we're looking to push up the demand, and at some point there's going to be a magical crossover point where it then makes transitions into making sense for us to be in HIPS.
Right.
Not because of the margins, not because of the money side of it, but purely to satisfy the demand and make sure that we're able to generate the volumes. Because if we're doing our job right and getting 50,000 people excited about playing Warmachine, we better bloody well have 50,000 Warjacks to sell them.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to kind of make them. So having that 5 year plan and knowing where that X happens, and obviously, not obviously, the life cycle for a product that we're releasing via resin is quite different in terms of length from the product that we're releasing via HIPS. There's probably an extra 12 months on a full plastic kit compared to a resin kit. So
Right.
having the same thing that you're developing but different lengths of timeline and trying to line them all up, you have to have quite a long range plan for us to know right now what we're doing, we're going to reap the benefits of in 3 or 4 years' time. But that's another layer of why I find my job endlessly fascinating is, it's just one of those things, knowing that stuff that we talk about now won't pay off for 3 years, 4 years is kind of cool because when it does pay off, it feels like, I get a buzz out of it. It's like, yeah, sweet. We're kind of, this happened because we meant it to, and we've
Yeah.
worked towards this for 3 years, and now it's happened. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So you're constantly planting seeds that you're going to hopefully harvest later on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, and bringing it back to that sort of gaming analogy, it is like, you're making smart plays now, and like you say, you're not going to see the results for a number of turns when you do the victory when you
Exactly.
count
Yeah.
your
I mean,
victory points and stuff. So
yeah, you're right. It's just, and I think this is something that, and actually, like, shower thought I had the other week was, and I don't ask me when I'm going to be able to do this, but it did kind of, I was like, oh, I should try and get in touch with, like, the government and the education sector, because I just firmly and passionately believe the value that tabletop games brings to people's lives. And I'm not talking about like edutainment, but I think there's a way, because I think that can be a little bit heavy-handed and a bit crap, to be honest with you. But I
Mm.
think there's core games that have meaningful experiences in and of themselves, but also have so many fringe benefits that could be used for education, and not just, you know, what your number binds are up to 10, or like being able to add things up, or but critical thinking. I mean, like, you seem like a smart guy. Like, I look at the world and I just think like, as a race, we've lost the ability for critical thinking. We firmly believe in our own cognitive bias, and we take
Mm.
everything that sounds like it makes sense as gospel, and everything that doesn't make sense we just assume is complete rubbish and lies. And no one, and we've just lost that ability to stop and go, well, hold on, that might just be a different view to the same thing. I
Yeah.
blame social media. It's largely why I don't use it. I think, not that I want to get too deep down into my kind of tinfoil wearing kind of bunker mentality, but I just think there needs to be a bit of a reset on social media, because I think it's turning us all into kind of slightly crazy people, and I kind of want to go back to having intelligent discourse with people, and I find when I'm playing games, and you can have a difference of opinion. Role playing games are just fantastic for that, but you work out how to resolve it, and it teaches you important life skills that can be mapped onto any part of your life, really. And like you say, that understanding, it's actually one of the earliest tests that they do on kids to kind of determine their future potential. It's where they kind of, I'll give you a sweet, and you can either eat it now, or in 20 minutes, I'll give you two sweets. And the kids that go, yeah, I can wait 20 minutes to double up, sure. They're the ones who tend to demonstrate the aptitude that's going to, take them down a certain path in their life. The other kids who are a bit more, well, I've got sweet now, cool.
Yeah.
Don't know what's going to happen in 20 minutes, do I? So they tend to, have an aptitude to go down a different part in life. But, finding that and teasing that out and showing people how decisions made now do have ramifications later, but being able to kind of control your life, I think there's really interesting life skills there.
I agree. Yeah, I think you're totally right. And also, even beyond those sort of critical thinking skills and all that sort of stuff, like we were talking about, the social aspect of it and the way
Yeah,
in which collaboratively telling stories, even if our interpretation of the story is different,
yeah.
we were all at the same table enjoying the same thing together.
And that's
And
that's
that,
one of the
yeah,
things
is really
that
important.
I say to anyone who listen is the thing I love about gamers is we do not care what you look like, who you are, what you've done. We care about the game. Like, so I can rock up and I'm a big, bold, middle-aged guy, right? And I can be playing an 18-year-old kid. I can be playing, a middle-aged mum. I can be playing, tall, short, thin, fat, skinny, whatever. Doesn't matter to me, because we're playing a game that we both enjoy. We have a common connection, and you almost sort of bypass that sort of physical layer of communication, and you're now just talking with someone. And I guess that's how I find it so easy to make friends with people in gaming, especially, is because deep down we all know that we all like the same stuff, and we're all kind of part of the same gang, which is super cool, really. And
Yeah.
again, if I could change the world, like I'd want the whole world to kind of have that attitude where it doesn't actually matter who you are and what you look like, and it's more it's more important how you behave and the kind of things that you spend your time on. So
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. Well, before we go, Matt, I just
mm.
wondered if, I know you probably can't reveal too much about that future for the Iron Kingdoms and for Warmachine, but is there anything that you're working on that you are able to talk about that's on the way?
um, for Warmachine in particular, what can I talk about? So I've got there's a faction that's been announced called Old Umbry, and the sculpts are starting to come through now. So that's a really exciting time. I've got a couple of models that are actually on the printer at the moment, so I'm going to swing by the studio later and pick those up. So that's kind of cool. We're working on a another plastic kit, which is going to be so we're launching a two-player start set, which is Signar versus Kador, kind of classic red versus blue. That's a plastic kit, and we're working on another one of those that's going to be coming out next year. I think we've got two coming out next year actually. So I don't think they've actually been announced what they are, but I can tell you that's what I'm working on,
Right.
and making sure that all kind of ticks along. RPG wise, obviously we've just done the Kickstarter, so that's the Strange Light Kickstarter. So that's currently being developed at the moment, but we're starting to sort of plan the roadmap of what's next for IK RPG. So yeah, no, it's all hands to the pump at the
Yeah.
moment. There's lots of good stuff in the pipeline.
Amazing. Yeah, loads of exciting stuff to look forward to. Well, Matt, I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. It's been absolutely awesome. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting me kind of waffle on about random stuff that I think is important.
It was great. Yeah, it was really good. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me. It was great to hear all of those tales and stories from behind the scenes. Really fascinating stuff, and I really enjoyed it. If you'd like to find out more about Steamforged Games and Warmachine, check out the link in the description below. You'll also find a link to my Patreon where you can get access to early and exclusive content, regular updates, Discord, and monthly giveaways. I really appreciate any help you can offer, whether it's through Patreon or through liking and sharing and commenting on this video. So thank you very much for your support. You can listen to my interviews as a podcast. Just search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you get your pods. And you'll also find my other podcasts, the GW Films Club and the GW Books Club, on podcast feeds as well. Thank you once again to Matt. Thank you for listening. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.